Auzubillahiminash-shaytanir-rajeem. Bismillahir-rahmanir-rahim. Assalamu alaikum viewers. I'm your host FAIZA NAQVI with a prayer. May Allah keep you all safe, healthy, blessed, and increase your tawfiq and hasten the appearance of Imam of our time, inshallah. Today the topic we are about to discuss is related to the Yemen, how the geographically and strategically it is important place for this world, in other words, and how a human crisis is going on over there, and no one is paying attention at all. Where 80%, the people, the children, human, women's and men's and old people are suffering and at verge of hunger, pain, and diseases, and there is so much pain ongoing over there, and there is no one who is paying attention to that place, and no one is helping them. Instead, in terms of Yemen war, there is like who are Houthis who are fighting against their government, and other international allies who are helping them in many ways, are being supported by the international so-called humanitarian countries who always talk about humanity, who always talk about fighting human rights, and then they are what they are doing. A country where people who are 80%, like more than 80% people who are suffering with diseases and lack of food and malnutrition, and there's so much pain, and still they are being provided by those so-called humanitarian countries who are giving all the kind of weapons to the Saudi government in order to fight against Yemen, a poor Arabian country. Why this country is so much important for them, and what does it have inside it that they have an eye on, and why they can't see the people suffering pain and agony in there, and still they are providing and selling so much weapon over there, and like strengthening Saudi Arab to fight against Yemen. So we will talk about it further in depth, how geographically it is important, and we'll see what our panel says about it. We do have very honorable guests with us, Brother Sayyid Mohsin Abbas, who is analyst and have a very critical eye on different international affairs, and we have with us Firasul Najm, a brother who is always working for humanity and fighting against human rights in his country, for his people and everyone around the globe. Assalamu alaikum to both of you, and I am really honored to have you both on the show. Thank you so much for joining in.
Walaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.
First of all, I would like to know, Mohsin Bhai, from you, give us a very brief history of Yemen war, so that people would understand how it has turned into a proxy war, and who is supporting what and why, so that our the viewers could understand the real intensity of this place, and how geographically it is important for us to understand this.
Well, to make it very brief, because this war and this conflict has been going on for decades, and the exploitation of Yemen by the Anglo-Zionist imperialists has been going on for even longer than that, since British colonial times. So Yemen is really yet another victim, yet another oppressed nation, and oppressed by Anglo-Zionist imperialism, be it American imperialism or British colonialism. Both have had a chunk of this, and now increasingly it's the Zionists, I think, who are the driving force behind much of what's happening in Yemen, in fact. So in a nutshell, though, these Anglo-Zionist powers were using their Saudi proxies. So the Saudi clan, the rise of the Al Saud in Saudi Arabia, has facilitated the new kind of control of Yemen, which was being imposed by the empire. Now, the Saudis had it fairly straightforwardly wrapped up for many decades, and they essentially were pillaging, plundering on behalf of the Americans, and really acting as a local policeman or a watchdog, if you like, over other Arab nations, Yemen being one of them, Bahrain, the Emirates and various others, Qatar, they were all within the same, if you like, sphere of control via the Saudi petro dollars, etc. So what we have is Yemen, the poorest of all these Arab nations, essentially being oppressed by the richest, which is next door, on behalf of their masters in Washington, Tel Aviv, and London, essentially. And I think that once we saw the rise of the people, the oppressed people of Yemen, in the shape of Ansarullah, a movement which is predominantly linked to the Houthis in the north, you saw for the first time a real resistance emerging, and the resistance achieved great success. Firstly, in booting out the puppet president of Yemen, who was basically kicked out, and they took over large swathes of Yemen, mostly the north. Sana'a, the capital, fell more recently, and that was where the big shockwave happened. Once the capital was under the control of Ansarullah and the resistance movement, of course, all hell breaks loose even more, and the Saudis since then have been given more and more weapons by the Americans. Of course, this is great news for the Americans either way, and the empire still wins because they get to sell their shiny weapons. So the Saudis have been draining their coffers, buying huge, air power and missiles and goodness knows what. And what they've done is not only use those weapons to try and subjugate Yemen in a sort of in a imperialist standard way of fighting man to man. What they've done is they've targeted the infrastructure of Yemen in a way which hasn't been seen, in many wars that I know of, where even the waterworks have been deliberately attacked, causing cholera and all sorts of other diseases to erupt. Weddings have been bombed. These are all extrajudicial killings, if you like, really. They're war crimes, but weddings, funerals, they haven't been spared. Civilians particularly have been targeted. It's been an indiscriminate sort of air bombing campaign by the Saudis, logistics provided by the Americans and the intelligence services of the deep state from Tel Aviv and Britain, all involved. Probably on the ground soldiers and forces as well, but they do it clandestinely. And the net result is that they've tried to really bludgeon Yemen into submission, and over 22 million people who are now in need of food aid, and the 11.3 children who need humanitarian support, and the tens of thousands, even more, who since 2016 and the cholera outbreak have all become victims of the war as well. This is just obviously something of the overview, but there is another factor. Because while the Saudis have been one of the major players, and of course the air raids and their links in Aden, etc., are there for all to see, and that's their role, the United Arab Emirates has been another major, player on the side of the axis of evil, as I call them, the imperialist empire. And the United Arab Emirates have committed the heinous crime of also involving ISIS and the ISIS forces down in the south, and their objective is also to create a split between southern Yemen and northern Yemen. The UAE itself is increasingly moving towards creating its own kind of separate Yemeni state. So their backup option is really to create a division of Yemen altogether. So all in all, what you can see is an alliance of all of the mercenaries hired by the Saudis, on the behest of the Anglo-Zionist Empire, who are coming in to try and wrest back control of a Yemen which they were constantly plundering before, and still are, to be honest, in places like Hadramaut. What they're after is the oil, there's frankincense, there's all sorts of other minerals, hugely rich minerals which are there to be exploited. And the other major significant strategic objective of the Israelis and the Americans and the British is the Bab el Mandeb route for maritime trade and military and other hardware, which is basically crucial. That avenue or that lane of maritime shipping is basically goes, well, it ends up in the Suez Canal, which is clearly part of Israel and Egypt and the Anglo-Zionist empire's lifeline as well in terms of trade. So again, the threat to the Bab al-Mandeb from the Anglo-Zionist imperialist point of view is another thing that they're absolutely desperate about. But I think that gives an overview that there is basically a struggle of the real Yemeni people on the ground on the side of the Ansarullah movement who are fighting for freedom and for liberation from, you know, hundreds of years of colonial and imperial subjugation and oppression.
Thank you so much, Muslim Bhai, for giving us such a brief and very deep introduction and history of this whole war going on in the Yemen. Firas Bhai, I would move on to you and would like to ask you, how do you see the role of colonial powers in that war? Like, what kind of, you see some part of it has been mentioned by Muslim Bhai as well. But what would you like to add into that? And what do you think we, as a, like, whoever we are, wherever we are, what we need to look at when we are talking about Yemen war, and why should we look at that thing? What are so much important things we need to notice, understand, and make sense of? What kind of strategies these colonial powers are trying to use in that, through that war, you can say, and what are they trying to achieve, do you think?
Yes. Brother Mohsen brought up a lot of good points that are essential to understanding this problem and why this war is going on in Yemen. Yemen is a very important place, very strategic place to enter West Asia, and it's a very important route. As he said, he brought up the Bab al-Mandeb. I think this is actually one of the most important strategic points for them, and this is what they want to control. It's all about geopolitics and controlling the region and securing their most important ally and base, and that is Israel, the cancerous criminal regime in that area. And these colonial powers from many years back have always tried to control the whole region, but and specifically Yemen, they always were trying to, but they always failed, because Yemen is known to be called Maqbarat al-Ghuzat, and that means the graveyard of the invaders. This is a well-known quote because nobody could conquer and control that land and those people. The Yemenis are well known to be very resilient and very resistant. They're people that have, they're the origins of the Arabic tribes. They are the Arab tribes. That's where we originate from, like all the Arabs. And they're the most purest, you can say, of tribes, because as we know of colonial powers, when they get into a country, they also rape women. Unfortunately, it's not something I want to talk about on TV, but this is part of it, right? Because they'll be mixing in with between families and things like that, and they want to control and they want to impose, so they do it in different ways. And one of them is to take women from those countries and somehow, infiltrate, let's just say, the bloodlines and the lineages. And they weren't able to do that in Yemen. That's why you see today the Yemenis, even when they come out in gatherings, they always dress up in their own, tribal wear, like their own clothes, and they don't have a lot of Western influence. If you notice that, you feel like when you see them, if you've watched the movie The Messenger, about the Prophet Muhammad, the old movie, when you see them even in this time in 2023. 1444 in the Islamic calendar, you feel like as if you're living in that time, the old times, because they're so organic and natural, and they still hold on to their roots. And they're a great nation. They're a great nation. They're great people. They're very humble. They're very simple people, but they're very strong people at the same time. They don't let the colonial powers or any kind of evil power or arrogant power to enter their land and take over and control and try to infiltrate in their family life and their cultural and their religion. That's one thing that I know about the Yemenis. Um, the Bab al Mandab is a passage to get into West Asia, and as the brother Mohsin was saying, so the military field can enter in, so they can get more military, let's say arms and things like that to enter, to Saudi Arabia or to their puppets, right, or to the Zionist regime. The Strait of Hormuz is the other passage is very important, but they know that that could be easily choked and controlled by the Iranian government. The Islamic Republic of Iran can easily close that up, and if Bab al Mandab was also closed up, that means you would choke all the water passages getting inside West Asia, and that means the Zionist regime would be choked, and they wouldn't be able to refuel. For instance, all their fighter jets wouldn't be able to refuel if Iran and the resistance allies were to hit the military bases of the U.S., let's just say, in the Zionist regime. Then they wouldn't be able to bring in any more weapons or any more food or any more anything for these criminal entities and for their bases. So Bab al-Mandab is very strategic and important for them to control the region, not just Yemen. And let's now that you brought up the word colonial, the planning of all the targeting and attacks and to control Yemen and to try to choke Yemen and make Yemen submissive, all the logistical support is in one area in Yemen, somewhere on the borders of Yemen or in Yemen, where the French, the British, and the Americans. So these are the three main countries and regimes, like systems, that have colonized the majority of the world. They're the ones right now sitting there telling the Saudis what to do, where to strike, which areas to blockade, how to deal with this whole war. So the real colonial powers are all involved in this, and they've had hundreds of years of history of controlling many countries and nations and plundering their resources and playing with their lineages and causing so much seditions and trying to control. But they're not able to in this era, this sophisticated, advanced era with all these weapons. They're not able to control Yemen and make Yemen submissive. So this is a very, very strong sign from God Almighty, as I look at it, is that the kufr is losing against the iman, because the Yemenis are known to be Ahl al-Hikmati wal Iman, the people of wisdom and belief, like of faith. This is the Prophet Muhammad. That's what he said about the people of Yemen. And these people are able to defeat the most mightiest army in a way. How can you say they're not a strong army, the Saudi regime or the coalition, but they're controlled and they're being pushed by one of the mightiest armies. And at the same time as the weapons that they have bought, the Saudi regime has been purchasing weapons for many, many years from all kinds of arms expos. And they've been training in all these countries, and they've been learning how to use all these sophisticated weapons, the most advanced weapons that the world has supplied them with. And they're using it in Yemen, and they're failing miserably. They're not able to get any of their goals or missions accomplished in any way. All they do is embarrass themselves and embarrass the colonial powers that put them in power and push them towards this war. Like Brother Mohsin was saying, they strike funerals, they strike hospitals, they strike schools, they strike all kind of places where it's all civilians and innocent people, and places where people are gathering as families and things like that. Like, MSF, Doctors Without Borders, had to pull out of there. And their president at that time, his name was Peter, he said, this was only like 2 years into the war or something like this, he said that I've been to many conflict zones, including Syria, and have never seen anything like Yemen. They even hit MSF hospitals, like, mobile hospitals that are set up, and they have the Red Cross on them, they're GPS known. They're not supposed to hit those places at all. They hit them many times. The Red Cross president at that time, he also visited inside Yemen. We're talking about only 5 months into the war in 2015, August, because the war started in March. We're going into the 9th year anniversary, I think, soon. So March 26th, he said that 5 months when he came down, he said 5 months in Yemen is similar to 5 years in Syria of destruction. So in 5 months, the Saudi regime and their coalition, this is so much destruction. Almost it looked like 5 years in Syria of havoc and destruction. So what you were telling me and asking me were, what can we do? I think this war in particular, because the United Nations, I think 3 years or 2 years down the road, said it's the worst humanitarian crisis in the whole world. So this is from the United Nations, not from Faras, not from Mohsen, not from Press TV, not from Al Mayadeen or Al Manar or Al Alam or all these channels that we're affiliated with, because we're affiliated obviously because they are the people of the truth and they speak the truth and they give us the freedom to speak the truth. But you know, this really unmasks the colonial powers that act like they are, or preach that they are fighting for human rights and justice, and they're getting involved in the world to try to bring dignity and equality and all this stuff, right? This is what they promote. But these colonial powers were exposed. They were unmasked, I think, by Yemen, because their resistance was so strong, and there were such humanitarian people as well, and merciful people, even towards their nation and towards their enemy. Even when they caught the Saudis, they didn't torture them or do any of that stuff. They put them in prisons. They gave them their rights until they did a prisoner exchange, or so on, right? But the thing is that these powers are all involved in arming Saudi Arabia, all involved in being silent in the United Nations in any resolutions, being involved. Also, they're involved in not supporting any resolution. Okay, they actually stopped any resolution against the Saudi coalition, like to impose sanctions, or to have a no-fly zone, for instance, or to send in UNIFIL forces in between the borders between Saudi and Yemen to stop this war. They can easily do this, but they don't do this. Okay, even in the United Nations, one time there was a resolution, or there was a statement by Ban Kuman, that he was a Secretary General at that time, and he said clearly, he said that they're like child killers or something like that. He brought up something like this about the Saudis, and then they made him retract his statement, apologize, and he said it clearly on TV that he was blackmailed. They told him that if you didn't do this, okay, that if you didn't retract your statement about the Saudi coalition and after they killed children, that they would stop a certain donation to a certain sector of like a certain part of the United Nations, that the Saudi regime actually somehow gives money to support some kind of humanitarian cause for Palestine or something like that. So they blackmailed him and told him this, and he said that I couldn't. He said it bluntly on TV that I couldn't lose this funds for this project or whatever. So I have to do this. So he made it ridiculous. Like he embarrassed himself, embarrassed United Nations, and showed that United Nations is actually a tool, and it could be bullied, and it's not bipartisan. It's it's supposed to be working for human rights and not being blackmailed or bribed or bullied into anything. What kind of United Nation is that? If you're scared to lose a few dollars here and there, and then you're gonna cover a crime for a criminal and a war criminal, and then we also seen that the International Criminal Court didn't do nothing, no investigations. These organizations are now, honestly, there's no credibility in them. There's no trust in them. We can't rely on these organizations in any way.
I'll come
It
back.
really unmasks.
Mm.
It really unmasks
Firaz, may I
these
come back to
organizations
you
as well.
on this point again? because these are very important points you are mentioning. So I would a little bit ask some questions from Mohsin Bhai as well. Mohsin Bhai, because as we mentioned previously, that this is a kind of proxy war among the world powers, you can say, against, for example, Mustafin and Yemeni peoples and Houthis. So, what do you think? How do you see the role of Iran in that? Because obviously, in one way or other, they are obviously trying to influence Iran as well, or maybe they always, whenever we talk about these places and this war, name of Iran is always there. How do you think that the Houthis are they have any impact of revolution of Iran on them as well, or is there any particular support Iran is providing to the Houthis by any chance? Do you think what kind of support they are providing? If how do you see that, and what are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's an unsaid reality. Well, it's an unprovable reality that the Islamic Republic of Iran is very much, at the very least, morally supporting Yemen. The Yemeni Ansarullah are hugely in love with the Islamic Revolution. They're in love with the Islamic Republic of Iran and the principles of that nation. And I think that they've been inspired very much in their rise against the oppression by the Islamic Revolution in Iran itself. And I think for those of us who would take an educated guess, because nobody's going to be able to come and give you figures and statistics about what kind of weaponry comes from where, but I would hazard to guess that they're definitely learning from Iran, because Iran is that region's primary anti-imperialist, anti-oppression movement and force. And the likes of Haji Qasim Soleimani with the Al-Quds force did make it their business that they would go through with what Imam Khomeini said, which was that Iran and the revolution will always stand for the Mustazifun and the oppressed of the region. And they've also said that they will stand against the oppressors. So the Yemenis came definitely into that category of the oppressed, and they themselves have principles which are rooted in Islam and have a spiritual movement and a spiritual understanding about what their duties are as a people. And I think that, of course, there is that natural harmony between the revolution. And on a practical level, it's quite clear that, number one, the Yemeni forces themselves had access to certain military technology. Their own army, their own training also allowed them to have access to all sorts of modern technology, of which the most significant and important is their ability to fly drones and to fire ballistic missiles. They're capable of both, and they have been doing both, and they've had that boldness and bravery to be able to make Saudi Arabia pay the price to some extent for a lot of their war crimes by launching their own drone attacks and ballistic missile attacks on Riyadh and various other military targets in Saudi Arabia. They've not done the heinous crimes that Saudis have done by targeting civilian populations, but they certainly now have the ability to hit their enemies. And so much so, the effectiveness of that was so much so that the United Arab Emirates made a major pullback in the level of involvement they had in Yemen when they were their own airports and various other sites were hit by Yemeni drones. So that drone technology, there's a suspicion, of course, the Anglo-Zionist Empire says openly that Iran supplies weapons and is involved with the Yemeni war. The reality, I think, is that the Yemenis themselves, they are the ones fighting on the ground. They are the ones who have the ability to stand and offer the resistance. They had certain technology and certainly military hardware. On the open market, the Yemenis can buy military hardware from anybody, the Russians, the Chinese. These things are bought on an open market. It's not necessarily the case that Iran is the only or key supplier even. But what's certainly really fascinating is the way that the Yemenis have used military tactics, because what you're talking about is a Yemeni force which is hugely inferior in terms of its military hardware, perhaps even its training as a sort of fighting force initially. So to take on, the might of the Americans and their sort of planning. I mean, in fact, the Desert Storm, which is what I think they called it. I'm not sure whether that was the right title. There was a title that I'm sure Firas might be able to correct me on, but Bin Salman thought that he would finish Yemen within a matter of 15 days or a month or so. He thought this campaign that he launched against Yemen would be over within a matter of weeks. Of course, years later, he's still no nearer to achieving that victory. And it's the tactics. The Yemeni forces have quite often fought not open conventional warfare, so army to army style. They've had this fantastic ability to be able to disappear into the desert, to rise up again and then attack. Small units have learned to do kind of hit and run operations, being able to, carry out amazing, successful operations against the Anglo-Zionist Empire, and they're still not. I mean, the empire is still very confused about how to deal with these kinds of military tactics, as they've never seen them before. There's a suspicion amongst those of us who are into our military, fighting techniques that Haji Qasim Soleimani and the Al-Quds force are probably it does have the hallmarks of the kind of tactics that they would be able to use as resistance fighters. We've seen it with Hezbollah, the way they fought against the Israelis. And so too we see it here with Yemen, where we're seeing a similar sort of hallmark of the way that the fighting takes place is very unique and very successful.
So how do you think where this war is going on? Like, I mean, which side is going to move on? Like, is there any way to finish it and this, or is going to stay ongoing, or how? And how you see the place, like obviously there are people who are with Saudi Arabia, America, Britannia, Britain, you can say, and other obviously coalition forces, and there are some who are with, for instance, Yemen, Iran. And how you see this kind of blocks becoming in future, or how you see it, and what should we know about it, like in order to understand the situation, and how it's going to impact in the region further. If you say, for example, if there is still war going on and there's still these things keep going, then what would happen, and how a common person is related to this war, like because often people think this is between those, these are the proxy wars, why should we talk about it, why should we do that, and we see no signs of this, like their current situation, what is going on in Yemen at the moment right now, for instance, what kind of suffering and pain and stuff like that is going on, and especially in mainstream media anywhere as such, in a proper way. So how do you see that, and then how, so that we can see the current situation. Yeah.
Firstly, the Anglo-Zionist Empire and the Saudi proxies have no honor. There is no virtue. There is no rules of war. There is nothing that these people will abide by. No international laws, no rules, no regulations. They have no regard for any civilized, if you like, code of fighting or for any behavior. They lie, they cheat, and they plunder. They basically have constantly violated the peace agreements that have been arrived at. The Saudis constantly violate those whenever they choose. They are continuing to strangle the ordinary civilian population with not only the sanctions widely, but also all the ports, apart from Hudayfa, are controlled by the Anglo-Zionist empires, if you like, proxies, and they starve the Yemeni. This starvation is not happening by accident. It's a deliberate policy of war. It's a war crime. The cholera, the starvation, the lack of food, this is not an accident. And the UN itself is also complicit in this, I'm afraid. For us, rightly castigated the UN because they have been very lackluster in everything and anything that they've done in regard to trying to protect the Yemenis. And in fact, they're really just acting for the Americans who supply most of their funding anyway. So I don't know why everybody expects the UN to ever do anything decent. You see, Trump put it very openly. He said, look, we're milking the cow. And Saudi Arabia is the cow, and the Americans are milking it, and they do it by giving, for instance, 30.1 billion arms contracts to Boeing, General Dynamics, Raytheon, Lockheed, you name it. All of these guys are milking that cow. The Saudis are paying all of that money to buy American weapons so they can keep the American economy floating as well. That's also partly why the Americans want to bleed Yemen and to bleed the Saudis, in fact, as well. They're bleeding both. The reality is that the war will not stop for the foreseeable future because of these very reasons. Economically, it is profitable for the West to continue this kind of these war crimes and this heinous attack on the Yemeni people. I'd say that the problem for them is this, though, that if they continue this behavior, what they're creating is a kind of resentment on the grassroots, which will eventually turn into a storm which they will not be able to control. They've already done it with the Palestinians. They've done it in Syria. They've done it in Iraq. They've done it within Iran, of course, and they're doing it in Yemen. I mean, I probably missed a few out. Afghanistan, probably there. And of course, if you look at Libya, you can't discount the wars that they created there. And now they're doing it in Russia. You see, they're in a fear mode. They're losing their grip as an empire. They're losing their grip on the people. And people are waking them up in these regions, and they're rising up and standing up. So therefore, they should have learned the lesson that the more you oppress, the more people will rise, and the more the truth will come out, and the more difficult it will become for them to maintain their sort of decades-long or hundreds of years-long control over these regions. And I think that the way it will play out is that day by day, the Islamic Republic of Iran, for instance, as one example, will get technologically more and more savvy. Already within the space of 40 years, they've gone from having no military capability of manufacture to becoming the world's leader in drone technology, or the world's leader in bioengineering, for instance, or cloning. These things, they're becoming the leaders in terms of ballistic missile making as well, so much so that the Russians and the Chinese are coming to them. So you can project this into another decade further down the line, and what you will find is this region will have, through the likes of the Iranians and the Yemens, the emergence of a new power, a new resistance power, which ultimately will make it so difficult for the Israelis and for the Americans to remain there. They'll also expose the puppets that exist in the Gulf despotic monarchical tyrannies, that the people there will also catch a taste for what real freedom is and what real liberty is. And furthermore, as those subjugated nations, because that's what the Saudis are, they're just having most of their money ripped off. What they'll find is once the oil runs out, these Westerners and these powers will gradually lose interest in those areas where there's no geopolitical financial benefit, and they will dump them anyway. And already the Saudis are beginning to turn to the Russians or turn to the Chinese or beginning to consider their options, because they realize that actually it's a very, very dangerous thing to be totally in the Americans' pockets. However, that's very difficult for them to get out of their grips. It may be that the Yemeni revolution and the other revolutions that are occurring, the resistance, may become eventually a tangible, if you like, option for those who are enslaved to Anglo-Zionist imperialism, and that realignment as Muslims, that realignment as a people in that region who want dignity, could actually overthrow the Israeli cancer in that region, could overthrow the American bases that are embedded there. This is the dream, this is the hope, and over 30 years we've seen from no resistance to absolute resistance in that region. So why shouldn't we go with what Ayatollah Khamenei says, for instance, that within the next 25 years we're going to see the collapse of the Zionist empire in that region?
Sure. Firas bhai, I'll come to you now. How you see the human crisis over there and the role of world media, for instance, and kind of inability to show like what's going on in there. And I mean, I don't see any you can say much voices in favor of Yemeni people who are at verge of such a big chaos, humanitarian chaos, in which more than 80% people are just about to like die just because of malnutrition, lack of food and medication and stuff like that. And what do you think are their overall demands, and how would you what kind of message you think this at this time we need to convey to the people who are watching us regarding Yemeni people and their stance in this war and kind of situation they are facing, and the power who are fighting against them, for instance. So what are your views on that?
Yes, I think it's very important topics that you just brought up and subjects, especially with mainstream media. They're so silent and careless about the people of Yemen and their sufferings. And the United Nations said 5 years back it's the worst humanitarian crisis in the world. And we know that it's a continuous war, it's a continuous blockade, and it's a very severe blockade against the Yemenis. And the situation is always getting worse and worse for them. With all types of diseases and things. Um, Luckily, they were the one part of it that they actually were saved from was the coronavirus, because they're blockaded and because the airports are closed and there's not a lot of flowing of tourists and things like that from the world. They didn't get much of a problem when the corona happened. All the blockaded places were actually saved, so there was some kind of positive part to it. Even Gaza as well, like it's blockaded and so on. They didn't get much corona going inside there, and the COVID. But it just shows you that the mainstream media is controlled by certain powers, and that they're not really unbiased. They're not really transparent, and they're not really caring about real news. Because if they cared about real news, they would cover the worst humanitarian crisis in the world. I mean, it's the worst humanitarian crisis in the world. That topic by itself should be always be covered, right? I mean, it's common sense, it's logic, right? It's the worst humanitarian crisis in the world. We have to keep saying that. So I think that's our job then. If the mainstream media that controls a lot of the media and what people listen to and think about and believe in and care about, so if they're not covering it, so that means it's our duty as Muslims, especially now that Ramadan is coming. We should remind people that we need to bring a voice for the Yemeni people, and not just bring a voice for the Yemeni people as well. Help the Yemeni people. Send in aid. I think if a few people put their hands together, okay, unless if they have an organization, for instance, that they know, that they trust, that the money will go inside and help the people that are actually oppressed and need the help, not the Saudi mercenaries and their allies and so on. But those kind of people, we can do it. What we do as an organization, Canadian Defenders for Human Rights, every few months or so on, we do a campaign, aid campaign inside there, and we help the people of Yemen somehow, either getting them into projects where they become sovereign themselves, and try to build their own assets and businesses, such as sewing machines for women, such as buying, for instance, a vehicle for somebody to do some kind of work. I mean, there's different projects that we work on at times, because we want them to become self-reliant. We don't want to just continue to keep supplying them and letting them always wait for somebody to help them. I think that's one of the best key ways to get to fight this blockade in this battle. But we always do different campaigns. But put that aside, I'm saying every 5-6 people or family can put together some money and send it to a person of trustworthiness inside Yemen, and help distribute and help some type of project. So that's because we see that the United Nations is not helping, and the world is silent on the situation and inactive. So we need to act. I think Ramadan is a time to reflect, right? It's a time to not just reflect about the suffering of the people, and to actually do something. Allah is trying to get us to, think about the hungry. That's why we're fasting. One of the reasons is that we can remember the people that don't have the ni'mah, the blessings that we have, what Allah has provided us. So that at the point, we should care about those people, those sick people, the suffering people, the orphans, the widows, the people that lost their husbands in the fight against the Zionists and their puppets and their allies. So this is important. We need to go out there. We need to protest. We need to spread awareness. We need to hold our MPs, whatever you guys call them in England. I don't know what they call them. Congress people. Sorry.
Sorry to cut you, Faraz bhai. From your point of view,
Hold them.
what I
Yeah.
have understood from the discussion so far, like especially the Yemen war or even the any world crisis, whichever is going on, especially in Muslim countries. For example, if we talk about Kashmir or even Palestine, even in Yemen, even in wherever we go, wherever is crisis, human crisis, especially this crisis does unmask the world powers, like you said in your discussion previously, and Mohsen Bhai as well, that the role of UN, role of international court of justice, role of these kind of for example world health organizations and all kind of these organizations who so-called like are humanitarian and who are like kind of providing justice and humanity and the principles on this world, for instance, who are trying to like convey messages, they are unmasking as well, like through these kind of chaoses as well. So why this, there is more than like one Arab Muslim, if I'm not wrong, why this much big quantity of people, you can say, on this planet is not is unable to understand this reality, and they are not taking any step forward, they are not creating any kind of setup to support the people who really need justice, peace and humanity based on real principles of humanity. So why they are silent, like if we don't think about the governments, obviously they are puppets, they are sold souls, you can say. So how you see this thing in it? So I'll give you like 5 minutes if you can conclude it, so that I can go to Mohsen Bhai as well, because we have. So how would you
Okay.
how do you see
Yes, are you questioning the nations, the Arab nations and Muslims? Is that
now,
what you're
Muslim
questioning?
nations, for example, there are 56 at least countries, if
Yes.
I'm not wrong, who are Muslim, if we forget about the rest of the nations. And all of them are not Arab, right? So they are Muslim who are not Arab, but they are Muslim. So why they are not planning anything? Don't we, I mean, we do not have anyone around the globe who are Muslims and who are really thinking on these lines properly, that we really need to stand on our own, we need to do something for our own people who are in this kind of situation, and there's no at all to see practically.
Yes, this also relates to the Saudi regime and their control of Mecca and Medina, the most holiest places, and spreading their state-sponsored deviant sect, the Wahhabism and Salafism. This is a type of deviant doctrine that they were able to, with the rich, one of the richest lands as well because of the oil, they were able to infiltrate in many Sunni countries, especially Muslim countries, and hire certain scholars to serve their cause and to cause divisions and to spread hate against the Shias and to cause these internal divisions. The Saudi regime has a lot to do with this, and trying to indoctrinate different scholars and mosques and so on. And they did this for many, many years with a green light and support by a lot of these regimes and by the West. The West let them, operate all their different, centers and having scholars coming inside, and they were able to make them believe that the Shias are a danger, that the Shia doctrine and the Shia governments after Imam Khomeini's revolution are trying to infiltrate, are trying to make people potheist or whatever, mushrikeen or something like this in this kind of manner. They were telling them that these people are associating other people with God, and this is a project, and they're trying to infiltrate the Sunni world. This is not the true truth about the matter. These guys are liars, but they work to cause fitna. And the Quran says that fitna to ashaddu min al-qatl. It says that the sedition is worse than killing somebody. because it causes animosity, causes doubts in each other, it causes hatred, it causes masses amount of problems that will always eventually keep moving throughout societies and countries and governments and so on. So it's the Saudi regime has a lot to do with this, we can say. And they spread a lot of hatred towards the Shia Muslims. And today we see that the Shia pretty much dominate, like the places that are predominantly Shia are standing against the Zionist regime, standing against the American imperialist project and the colonial English projects. They're standing up for sovereignty. They're resisting. You have, like, for instance, in Iraq, you have the Popular Mobilization Forces. There's a strong force that's fighting. You have the Islamic Republic of Iran. That's also their Shias. You have, for instance, Hezbollah in Lebanon. Even Ansar Allah, they also they're Shia, but they're Zaydis, but still they're Shias. And this is also one thing, is that when you talk to some brothers that are from the Sunni world, unfortunately, some of them are deceived by the Saudi regime and their Wahhabi indoctrination, and they say, oh, they're Zaydis or they're Shias, and they want to control Yemen and they want to impose their sect in Yemen. But this is not the truth at all. The most open people are the Yemeni Houthis, like the Zaydis, let's just say, those people. They're very open to Sunnis. They even prayed like the Sunnis with their hands folded. Like their jurisprudence has a lot of openness towards the Sunnis and works with them. More than even the Ja'fari, I mean, and still they were, like, causing this fake story to try to make it look like it's a battle between Sunnis and Shias. And this is not what it is at all, because Sayyid Abdul Malik al-Houthi, the leader of Ansar Allah, has always talked about unity, has always talked about the love and respect between Muslims, and that we have so much in commonality, and that we should stand together and fight together against America, Israel, the British system that they, and all the British puppets that they installed in the region to support the Western project and the Zionist project. Is not there to support the people and their sovereignty and for distribution of equality between people for resources. They didn't do that. They always come and they take over, like Aramco or all these different companies. They're all stealing everything, controlling everything, and so on. So this is the main problem, I think. And the Muslims, a lot of them inside, they probably care about Yemen. When you talk to Muslims, and I meet Muslims in mosques and different places, they do care about Yemen, and they're against what the Saudi regime is doing. And I think the Saudi regime and their allies, the more they get closer to Israel, the closer the Muslim nations are waking up and finding out that this is not about Sunni Shia, this is not about these issues, it's about haqq and batil. It's about truth and falsehood, and it's about the oppressed against the oppressor, and that we should all stand together. I think slowly, it's all being unmasked and revealed and exposed. And I think that the Saudi regime, everybody should know that they're this Israeli puppets. They have normalized under the table, and they have also gave a green light to their biggest allies, UAE and Bahrain, to normalize with Israel without any rejection, without any condemnation, without any criticism. So obviously, it's very clear that the Saudi regime is supporting this, and they're supporting the normalization with the satanic regime. This is the Holy Land that should stand against Satan and the party of Satan, but they're actually allied, and they're also letting them have U.S. bases that occupies either Libya or occupies either Iraq or occupies Afghanistan. They're moving their military bases, their intelligence, and they're collecting information, and they're planning from the land of Prophet Muhammad. How can we accept this as Muslims? And I think Muslims slowly are waking up, and we need to do more awareness and more awakening to this. This is our duty, brothers and sisters. We need to do something. We cannot just sit around and talk about this on a show only. And this is good because this show hopefully gets out to people. But wherever we are, wherever we go, we need to make stands, and we need to also hold these politicians accountable. You need to get them on camera, open that camera, put in their face, and ask them, why aren't you supporting the Yemeni people? You're crying about Ukraine, you're crying about this. Why you're not supporting the Palestinians? Are you biased? Is humanity only in one part? Are you selective on humanity? Shame on you. That's what you should tell these politicians if they don't give you the right answer. I'm sorry to say this, but I don't want to talk in this kind of manner, but this is how it is.
Mm. I'll move on to Mohsin bhai. Sorry about the timing because we are just heading towards the end of the show. So we just have 3 minutes to 4 minutes left. Mohsin bhai, I want you to conclude the whole discussion and what exactly Yemenis need at this time, and what message do you want to convey to the community overall. So just keep that in your mind and just keep the time in your mind as well.
Well, I think first and foremost, the Yemenis they need food security. They need their health issues addressed. They need the water and sanitation that exists in that land to be fixed. They need an increase in the nutrition aspect of things as well. The education system it has collapsed, all but collapsed, more or less. And the displaced refugees, I mean, over 2 million people plus displaced, probably, and more. These are just some of the needs. So these needs can be fulfilled, as Brother Firas said, partly through our funds and through our money. We must give donations towards this. By hook or crook, there are groups like the Islamic Human Rights Commission that you can go to. Brother Firas will have people that he knows as well. It's not hard to find people who will give these donations to the right sources. So we must do everything we can to make sure that the Yemenis are on the radar and they are not overlooked. There are other places to distract us. Of course, there's right now Turkey, and the earthquake will take a lot of people's minds. Syria is an ongoing disaster. And of course, Iraq. There are many places which need our funds. But the Yemenis, as Brother Firas time and time again has emphasized, are very much at the top of that pile because they're suffering on a scale which is, incredible. I mean, 60% of the population, that's 18 million people, basically, who are food insecure. They don't even know whether they will get enough food to give them nourishment. So I won't go into the statistics. We've gone through those. It's a very, very disastrous situation. So our first obligation is humanitarian aid to the most reliable people possible. The second is to cause as much resistance here for the Anglo-Zionist Empire, especially those of us who live in the capitals of these people who are instigating this war, supplying the weapons and the logistics. We must make their lives even more uncomfortable, regardless of what the result is, whether it's through protest, demonstration, the MPs, whether it's through raising these things with our neighbors and just on the grassroots level, creating the awareness, whether it's on social media and making sure that we get the word out. There is absolutely no excuse for us not to be able to use our words, our pens, and these days our texting abilities as well on social media to be able to make sure that the Yemeni plight is not forgotten. The other thing, of course, is to support the resistance. Do not be shy about your support for the resistance, whether it's through supporting Ayatollah Khamenei and supporting the Iranian public, which is also under attack, or whether it's supporting the Popular Front for Liberation or the Palestinians. We must stand up and be counted on every level.
Thank you so much, Mohsin bhai. Thank you so much, Firas bhai. I'm really happy to have you both on the show on this important topic, and really grateful for. As viewers, I mean, like our guest has already emphasized that the biggest human crisis, we need to keep an eye on that. We need to create a, and we need to help the Yemenis as well as when we are associated to the other causes. We need to keep an eye on that as well because it's a human crisis at this day and age, and we need to really care about it. With this message, I'll take a leave, and inshallah, we'll see you next week. Have a great day. Allah Hafiz.